Hey there, vernacular faithful, Redcoat here. And I wanted to comment on something that I'd seen a recent video on. It was about 8 days ago. It was posted by one. Let me double check, make sure I'm not looking. Um, yes, posted by one JellyBox. And I like the information that he put forth in there. Go ahead and give that one a look at. It was called "The Secret of Funding Indie Animation," and looking at it, he highlighted a number of issues that I myself had over the years with regards to actually doing production. Although I was never in the animation space, I was in the gaming space, but it was still kind of a thing. It's like it's expensive. The art side of things is consistently the most expensive part of it. And I mean, on my end in particular, uh, it wasn't just paying the people to do the stuff for their skills, but it was also just having people randomly disappear, which I'm certain anybody who's actually been in the space knows exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, I digress. The thing that I wanted to look at, because he pointed to one interesting thing with regards to animation and what people did to actually get why animation existed in the first place, and also the primary means of monetization, that methodology that we've used over the years, of course, advertising. Because if you look back at He-Man and you look back at He-Man and some of the Hanna-Barberas and other things like that, there's always something, there's usually a tie-in. Now, um, and I'm not going to go too far into that information because that's stuff that's in his video, and I would want you to go and watch that one. But essentially, they were making the cartoons as glorified advertisements for the toys, and the toys would be what would sell to the kids. So the thing is that so they use the toy sales to actually fund getting the animations out there. But we come to a very important question that needs to be answered, which is why toys? Why was it that the toys were the lowest common denominator thing that they were selling to actually make the money, and the cartoons were the advertising method by which those things were sold? Of course, we have a similar idea happening here in the modern era where you have a cartoon and you sell merch to support it. But in reality, one of the things that I think might not necessarily be grokked here is that when people are buying the merch, they're buying it to support the animation rather than buying the merch because it is something that is enriching in of itself. So the question comes back in the day when you bought your GI Joe. When you bought your GI Joe, it was because the GI Joe was fun, or rather, okay, let's be real. When your parents bought you the GI Joe, unless you were one of those hardworking kids that mowed a bunch of lawns so that they could get the Cobra Commander playset, with I'm making up a thing, but I'm pretty sure something like this existed. Just go watch the toys that made us, and you can learn a lot there. Um, but basically, get the Cobra Commander playset. Now, that is the thing is, you bought those toys because those toys enriched you. They were fun, and also because going to the toy store was the only way that you could pick them up. But why were the manufacturers specifically building toys out of little plastics? The thing was that was the cheapest thing. That was the cheapest way to actually make something that the kids would engage with. So, why am I talking about this with regards to animation? So right now, when you go into the independent animation space and you're like, I need money, you just tell people, you kind of go around and you're like, well, just give us the money and we'll give you the animation. The animation is the product. And that can work to a point, but the fact of the matter is, for some of the most ridiculous, crazy stuff, it's very, very hard to get the amount of money necessary to run a proper animation studio that way. Now, there's some other things that you can do, I think, to actually make money on the side, and this is kind of looking at the voice acting industry actually, and kind of leaning back into that advertising angle of things. Um, so and I'm also going to be tying this into the gaming industry in particular. So you've got companies like WayForward and Creates. Why am I highlighting them? So Creates made the Mega Man, worked on the Mega Man Zero series, amongst other things. Right now, I think one of their more recent independent IPs was Azure Gunvolts. Way Forward, they made the Shantae series, but they also did a number of tie-in products, basically remakes of old Capcom games. If I remember correctly, they also worked on DuckTales tie-in video game. But the thing is, the model for those companies, before they could actually do their own independent work, they did a certain amount of work supporting other things, specifically doing um, the a group wanted to get their game made, so they went in and supported them and helped them make that game, and that's how they made their money. So basically, subcontracting out to other groups to make the money to be able to keep the company going, so that once the time was right, they could put the money in on their own project, and win or lose, they get it out there. Yeah, I mean, and vis-a-vis, that's one way to keep a company going. The other way is if you look at what's it called? League of Legends, because they also made Arcane, the animation thing. So, how do they fund that ridiculous thing? Now, other than the fact that, well, they funded it through League of Legends, frankly, and that was a product that was very, very successful. But not everyone can make something that is that big. But again, League of Legends is based off of the Dota formula. Uh, and the Dota, and that was already a proven thing. They just kind of remade it, and over time built up the money through the release of extra heroes and all this other stuff. There's a whole monetization thing going on there, particularly with customs and all that stuff. Which brings me back to the idea of okay, so I've mentioned two models, right? I've mentioned two models. So we have integrating some a way forward, subcontracting out to make the money to do their own independent projects. And I also mentioned in the voice acting space, um, while generally speaking, as a voice actor, you're just kind of loaning your voice out to help out with other things, but you don't always get to voice act anime. In fact, generally speaking, it's rare that you get to voice act anime. It's one of your crowning achievements in your career, um, unless you're Steve Blum, in which case you're just doing it constantly. But I mean, even he was doing a bunch of advertising stuff on the side to make ends meet. Actually, if you talk to a lot of different voice actors, that's going to be the case. Why am I highlighting this? So, the idea here is that you might have a big thing that you want to roll the dice on and make the big bucks. But the fact of the matter is, you need your company to continue running, so you've got to have that small thing, that you've got to have some other thing that your company does on the regular that is servicing people. So how does this connect back to the idea of the little pieces of plastic that are sold to create enrichment in a child's life, meeting that fourth desire out of the health, wealth, and not health, wealth, and stealth. I want to say health, wealth, and stealth, although I think that might be something to consider. Uh, Health, wealth, and relationships. Yeah, that fourth one, the enrichment, and that's what they're meeting with those toys. No, so the reason why those little pieces of plastic were then fashioned into enriching toys is because the plastic was cheap. The plastic was cheap. It was basically if we're looking at the nature of the economy, we were already doing stuff with plastics. We had a lot of oil. We didn't know what to do with it. And they're like, wait, well, I mean, we got this extra oil. Let's fashion it into something that people will buy. And so it was relatively cheap to actually produce these toys, and they could actually meet the profit margins. They could actually meet the profit margins to make it um, work. Okay, so that's the framework, right? You've got this thing that's really cheap to produce, but you can make more money than it takes for you to produce it, and people will buy it. Particularly, that younger demographic will convince their parents to buy those things for them. Now, if we step out of that, um, how can you do this in the animation space? Well, uh, the short of it is, well, shorts. The short of it is shorts. That's the first part of it. But um, all right, I'm gonna step across a couple things. So, firstly, if we're looking at the toy idea, What you would want to do is instead of looking to make, even a 15-minute animation, which is even that takes time, takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to get any of these things done. What you do instead is you co-opt the gaming space and you make a tiny game. And when I say tiny, I mean tiny. I mean less than Angry Birds. Um, with the same, with a similar with a small animation budget. Ideally, you would want to be making something that you could have um, 2 to 4 really, really skilled people put together, really, really cheaply. Um, Hell, I mean, if you already have all of the skill sets, you might pay out of pocket to get the thing made. The idea here is that you're making something that is enriching but low cost. Something that you could actually sell on something that you could actually sell on, say, the app market for like $1. Um, for like $1. And I mean, you could also go the in-game purchases route, but the thing is that you need to have guarantees that your art team is going to be sticking with you throughout the entirety of the process. Or at the very least, you need to be able to have enough money to have the revolving door, and that's to say nothing of the current what would the current view of those sorts of things amongst users. I mean, you'd have to handle it in a very particular way. I digress. You want to make something. You want to look at that same kind of model when you're looking at the plastics, where the plastics were cheap, so they forged something enriching out of that cheap stuff. And the thing that I will say on the indie game space, because again, small is extremely important in this regard, because let's say you're like, okay, let's make a thing. And I have made this mistake. So this is why I'm telling you this. I was like, okay, look, we're going to make a scrolling shoot 'em up. But we can't just make any scrolling shoot 'em up. It's got to have its own identity. It's got to be awesome. We got all of these crazy guns. We got these awesome bosses, 5 levels of 15-minute levels, which I didn't intend for those to be 15-minute levels, but it happened. It's how it went. And I should have actually split them in two. Anyway, we put that all together, built it in a garage, went through 22 artists over the course of the project because uh, I remember that thing I said of just moving away and disappearing, taking the money and running. I digress. Um, we did all that, right? And the problem was that since we couldn't hold on to our artists, the visual aspect just wasn't there. So the visual aspect wasn't there, and so in the reviews, people will be like, "Yeah, this game kind of plays good. It looks like ass. It looks like ass." I was like, "Oh, I know. I'm sorry, but I can't." You see, so my mistake was that I was trying to build a double A, well, was trying to build a B-level game when I was at the point where all I could really realistically, cheaply, and without risk make was an E-level game. Now, granted, I did build that B-level game, and it did get out there. So, well, my team did. But I digress. The thing is, I was trying to build I was trying to build one of those GI Joe vehicles, like the Jeep with the missiles and this little seat, and it comes with Commander Joe, and that sort of thing. I was trying to build one of those, when in reality, I should have been not even building a GI Joe, but one of their accessories. But hindsight's 2020. I did build, we did get the game out there, and there were a lot of lessons there. But I digress. you need to be looking at this in the same way. If you're in the indie gaming space and you're looking like, I want to make a video game and I want to make the video game that's been in my mind for all of these years and I want to make it perfect. The problem is that you're thinking about making the Cobra Commander um, base commander base area thing. So it's like it's got the search tower, it's got the activated light fixture, you got the turrets, and you've got a custom Cobra Commander that is specific to this little thing, of course, because you got to make it have that collector's value. You got all of these things that are coming in to this Cobra Commander base. You're trying to make that and you don't have the user base or the money to produce that regularly, even though you're building it out of the cheapest materials for the era. If we're thinking about this as you are Hasbro in that time, Hasbro, Mattel, either one, you get the idea. If you're thinking like you're one of those, the thing of it is that you're trying to put the cart before the horse. You need to start small. So instead of building the Cobra Commander set, or even uh, or even Duke Duke Joe Duke Joe GI's Jeep Jamboree Jeep. Let's see, Jeep. Anyway, jibbity da. Instead of building that, you're going to be building base Duke. And I mean, it doesn't even have any of the crazy colors or anything. Just building base Duke with the actuated legs and the rubber band torso. And the main thing is that you're building a little piece of the fun, and you've got the core element. Because remember, with action figures, the whole idea is that you're allowing your target demographic, or rather, you're allowing the kid to imagine a scenario, and you're making something that facilitates the creation of a scenario for them to play. And so, with this little Duke, it's not even the fact that he's Duke. I mean, Duke is kind of a seeding element. It's the fact that he's a toy with actuated parts that looks like a soldier man, or looks like a matte black sneaking assassin. Uh, the most popular action figure of one of the most popular action figures of that run, which was Snake Eyes. And the Snake Eyes was actually just Snake Eyes was just they ran out of color. They just were like, well, he was supposed to have a bunch of cool colors on him, but he's just all black. And he sold the best. Again, it comes back to that deal. It's like it's not those extra things on there. It's the fact that it facilitates an enriching imagination experience. And so all you need is that little action figure. And then you build up and you build up to the point where the kids are like, well, now I want to have action. I want the rest of the action figures and collect them together and then build the thing. But I digress. We're coming back to the core element of this, which is that the reason why it was action figures is because the plastic was cheap to produce, and the action figures model was small enough and cheap enough that you could produce a number of them, take a minor loss if some of them don't make it, but on the whole, you're making sales and getting things out there. The other metaphor that I would use here is the subprime mortgage, which for people who are in the housing who know a little bit about housing might cringe at the thought, but it's based off of this same idea. It's a subprime mortgage for those of you who don't know. So when you buy a house, well, okay, if you were ever able to buy a house, because economy currently, um, the idea was that your best bet would be to buy it wholesale, right? Just spend all the money, save up the money, spend the money, buy it. But most people couldn't realistically afford that, so they took out a loan called a mortgage. And these would be collected by banks, right? And so um, the the mortgages themselves would then be sold out to others as debt. The idea being that whatever is owed on that, the people who are paying into that, instead of that money going to the person that initially made the loan, it's going to whoever the debt is sold to. I know it's a little complicated. Just kind of try and track with me here. Anyway, the idea here is the debt itself was rated at different levels. So you have B level debt, A level debt, triple A level debt. You might notice I'm referencing back to when I said I was making an A level game. I was trying to make a B level game. So what did they do? So to get people to buy that debt off of them, what they would do is they would take they would take a bunch of E rank loans. An E rank loan is one that there's very low chance that somebody's going to pay that back. And that's based off of the person's credit history and all that stuff. So they take the E rank loan and they go, let's take 5 of these, put them together. And then we're going to throw in 1B, a 1B rank loan. And that's going to and we're going to average them out, and that's going to draw the E's up to probably D. And so that subprime, so that becomes a subprime mortgage where you have a bunch of different ones put together into one thing. And that all of those E's get put up to a D, which means as a whole, the loan is considered to be at D. Now, if we replace subprime mortgage with franchise, the idea here, franchise or brand, the idea here is that a brand isn't one thing. So if we look at something like something like Lackadaisy, they've got elements of this already going on. So Lackadaisy is right now amongst the indie space known for the fact that they did an animation and they're working on making more. But before it was an animation, it was a web comic. And the thing of it is that the collection of all of those comics is the collection of all of those comics comes together to make a value proposition. Where you could, and this is a thing that they're doing in their merch side, where they're actually selling comics. They're selling a bunch of different elements of merchandising, and so that, so they have an element of this idea of you have these smaller things that kind of trickle into making your bigger thing. The one of the issues that we come here with what that we come into though is that the smaller things are not there for their own selling. Whether they're there to support the brand, the franchise, the subprime mortgage. So they have a lot of things that are put together to make this dealing. Now, the issue one of the issues, and I mean, uh, to be fair, when we got to with the subprime mortgage thing, just to kind of end that little story there, because that was part of the reason why we had the one of the bigger housing market crashes in I think it was 2008 or 2009. Just watch The Big Short. You'll get The Big Short. You'll get a crash course on exactly what happened there. But the basic gist of it was people were buying the debt, and the debt was rated at D, but it was actually E, and that messed things up. There was a misrepresentation of the value, and when they realized that they weren't actually going to be getting that money back, they all pulled out, and da 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 da. It was something that was based off of confidence, and that's one of the things right now. If we're looking at the different independent animation propositions, is that a lot of it is based off of confidence rather than necessarily performance. Well, what does it even mean for an animation to perform? Well, again, if we're looking at this from health, wealth, relationships, and the fourth, which is called enrichment, and I'm always going to be highlighting the fourth because this isn't how people talk about this. They always talk about health, wealth, and relationships. They don't talk about enrichment. Um, you have a value proposition that when this comes out, it will be very enriching enough that you will be willing to that the money that you put into this will be worth it. Um, and so you have to fulfill. But the issue is that they don't have anything. So this is built off of the confidence that was put forth with that initial promotional thing. Now, how would I put this? The idea is that they've basically taken out a loan. They basically taken out a loan from the other people, from the people on this, and while they're getting more money in to get the project out. The problem is that it's very difficult to pay them back. As an animation studio, um, and forgive me, I don't know everything about the Lackadaisy group, so I could be off base here, but I don't know of any smaller projects or smaller clients that they're doing work for to keep themselves sustained enough that they can build and build and build. And again, this is coming back to that way forward model and that into creates model and even the VO model, where, the thing that you're known for, which is, voicing Piccolo in Dragon Ball Z or whatever, um, the way you got there was by doing a bunch of random TV spots talking about bitter butter battles. Or the monster truck rally on Sunday, um, and making the little bits of money here and there, and building up your reputation over time with other clients, and eventually you have both actual capital, which you can spend on the thing, but you also have social and business capital that you can spend on the thing. Um, so that's one of the angles there. So looking at all of that, let's step back into okay, so that's a cool theory. What do you even do about it? Well, again, stepping over into the indie gaming space, wow, we have something that meets the same criteria as the little pieces of plastic that people do with GI Joe. Specifically, you have something that if you keep your scope down, and I know it's crushing, but you gotta do it. Crush it down into something that manages to get the enrichment for less cost. We gotta crush it down into something like that. It could be something really, really tiny, like, um, well, okay, maybe not tiny, but it could be you're just releasing little visual novels with just static images, and if you really want to be dipping into the pot multiple times, you actually have those either tie into your animations, not be required, but enrich. You have those tie into your animations that give a little bit of information, so that if when your animations are released, they actually lead to more sales of your original works, as people like, oh wait, that character is in this. Well, I like that character. I want to see them, and so you have your little branch down there. Although you have to be careful because you don't want to MCU it where MCU it or original comics it where it becomes required reading. You have to be careful there. I mean, one of the other angles would be instead of it being necessarily that it's a part of your bigger animation franchise, it is its own little thing that is made specifically for this, stylized specifically for this. And so, to kind of give you, uh, let's say as a format. So instead of you're making that GI Joe, you're making a physics sim where you throw things at each other. I mean, making Angry Birds too. Angry Birds. Let's call it Angry Birds. Or you are making a falling game. Just you just set up gravity, your character's falling, and you're dodging things. What was it? There was there was a well game that was done that was built around that. But the idea is that you're making something tiny, and it might even be smaller than. And when I say tiny, I mean it's not the first idea that's going to come to your mind that's going to be small enough. You're going to have to go smaller. And I know that's painful for a creative when you've got all of these amazing things out there and you're looking over at Japan and being like, I want to see crazy animation. I want to be a part of that. But baby steps. The first thing that you need to do is you need to set the foundation for your team to be able to work. And that means you need to start small. Um, ideally, ideally, a product that only requires one character, only requires one vetted mechanic, and can be built in a game jam. I know that sounds a little bit painful, but that's the idea. You want to make something small but nimble. And then you just want to be able to make a bunch of them. Just do it. Be able to produce a number of these over time to strengthen your brand. And you still want to reach quality bar, but the fact of the matter is, if we're looking at this from a form, function, and feel, the function is to build your brand. So there is a quality bar that you need to meet, but it isn't the crowning thing. So since its functionality isn't specifically to be the grand dealie that makes you billions because it was so well received, you need to give it you need to give it that level of attention where instead of the focus necessarily being that it gives you a huge return, you need to be looking at it gives you a huge return, or specifically produces a huge amount of, how would I call it, social capital and clout, even if you're losing money on it. Um, you want it to just kind of do, hey, we exist. Hey, we make games. These games are fun. You'll also use it as your data. You'll also use it as your data points because they made a ton of different GI Joes. Not all of the Joes worked. A lot of them didn't. And so this would be the idea, is that you'd be making a bunch of different Joes. And you might end up doing something like Snake Eyes, where you're like, well, I didn't have that many people to do this thing. We just have the bare bones. It's a square and it shoots. And the people are like, oh my God, this is the most fun thing ever. That can happen. You can't really predict the market in that way, which is why instead of rolling one dice, one huge D100, you want to be rolling a bunch of D6s, just a bunch of them. That will, while you won't be necessarily getting higher returns, you might be getting consistent returns, specifically if you're paying attention to how much you're spending on each individual item, on each individual thing that you're putting out, and what your returns on them are. Now, the other thing is that you can't put them out. Well, some of them you can put out for free, but you don't want to make a habit of that. You don't want to train your audience to expect you to foot the bill on everything. You're giving them value. You need them to pay you for that. And again, it comes back to that thing when people are talking about sales, talking about health, wealth, and relationship, you're giving them enrichment. You're making their lives a little bit better and a little bit fuller. You're giving it more taste. Anyway, that's my little diatribe at this point on running on what you should be trying to do if you're trying to do one of those big indie animation things. Is you need to start small. You need to start small, and you need to be looking for clients to service. Well, you need to start small, and you need to figure out how you're going to be servicing your clients in your particular space. Now, as an animator, that means that you are in the enrichment space, which means you need to figure out to how to leverage your talents so that people are actually paying you to do that. And again, there is the advertising aspect, and I don't want to poo-poo that entirely. But it's important to understand that the advertisements go towards selling something else, and understanding what is being sold, or being able to be the seller of the thing that people are buying in that regard, is, a that's a boon. It's a boon in of itself. So, um, I guess just to kind of encapsulate this, my statement is: if you want to build up your big company and make those large scale products, make your Beauty and the Beast, make your Little Mermaid. Lord knows they've kind of killed those franchises, so the space is open for you. Uh, don't put the cart before the horse. The first thing is you need to be scaling down, and you need to scale down further than where you are thinking when you're initially wanting to do a thing, because likely what inspired you to do this was something that was built upon an already existing studio, or the parts of other studios that broke down and came together to build a thing. Um, yeah, so that would be my 2 cents. And I might talk a little bit about different ideas with regards to, okay, how do you make your GI Joes? How do you make your Joes? Or hell, if we want to go even more macro, how do you make your little Lego brick? And that's a different model. That is a different model, but it's still worth understanding, because that is talking about leaning into the strengths of your team. GI Joe's is leaning into your creative strength, um, is leading into your ability to create cool stories and create things that allow people to kind of engage and play. You're leaning into your ability to create play. The Lego brick is leaning into your ability to systematize and allow other people to create off of what you have. That's the Lego model. Um, but I don't want to go off onto that tangent. We'll talk a lot. We'll talk about that at another time. But yeah, that's everything I've got to say. So I'm going to sign off now before I say something stupid. Well, I already said something stupid, didn't I? Anyway, this has been Redcoat of Vernacular Games. Play the games you want to play, boyos. I'll catch you later.